Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking with Dr Marlene Marburg. She's from the Campion Ignatian Spirituality Centre. Thanks for coming in, Marlene.
Thank you for inviting me.
As we've discussed, the way in which we'll start the interview is just to go back over your spiritual history. So, you were born a Catholic, yeah?
I was born a Catholic, yes.
And into a fairly strict Catholic family.
Yeah, a sort of lower middle class family in Melbourne. We lived in various different parts of Melbourne, but yeah, we always found the Catholic Church every place that we lived at. And at that stage of your life, was that a comforting sort of experience? Oh yes, yes. My parents were quite religious and always prayed and did the rosary and novena and mass every Sunday and mostly Saturdays as well. And I always felt a real affinity with the idea of God and Jesus and Mary as well.
So there were all the answers. The answers were around you for the problems of a child.
Yes, I think so. Although, I probably didn't think too much about that until I was in my maybe about 8 or 9 or 10 maybe. And even into my teenage years, and I think I was becoming quite rigid about my religion, and I can remember even with a friend of mine who challenged me on some things about my Catholic faith, and she was far more flexible, and she talked about contraception and things like that. And no, I fought for the church. I was very, very strict.
Yes.
But yes, I'm very glad for those questions now. She and I are still friends, and we would have a very different conversation now. Yes. Yeah.
And so there was a bit of an evolution with that, wasn't there? You eventually came to the point where you started to ask some serious questions.
Yeah. I was married very young, and married for quite a few years and had a couple of children. And my next door neighbour invited me to come into her place for a prayer group, and I didn't think anything unusual about that. Not that Catholics joined prayer groups back in those days, but I did that. It was an ecumenical group, and I found that they thought about their faith in ways that were different to the ways that I had thought about my faith, and I liked it. I liked the fact that they thought about Jesus in very personal terms, and I wanted what it was they had, and so I went to a few different things that they invited me to, and I found that just being closer to Jesus and learning how to pray in a more conversational way rather than in set prayers or whatever was very helpful to me. So I eventually left the Catholic Church and spent a couple of years in a Baptist group. And I found that to be very helpful in one way, but to be very disorientating in another way. Right. And eventually I decided that it didn't really matter where I was, that I could pursue my faith, this new faith, in any place really. Yeah. And so I went back to my original parish, and I found that I listened to things with a different framework.
Right.
At the same time, I also went to study theology, and that was really helpful to me. I did that in at Yarra Theological Union, so I did a Bachelor of Theology.
And that's, yes. Just before we go to that, can we go back to disorienting? What was the part in that which was disorienting?
I think I gained quite a bit when I moved to the Baptist church, but I also lost something that was really important to me, and that was the power of symbol and ritual and those sorts of things that had become just a part of my life.
Yes.
And in many ways I felt like I was rootless. And yeah, I can remember my neighbour saying to me, watch your roots, be careful of your roots. and I think that she said it well, even though I didn't understand it at the time. Being rooted in the Catholic tradition is a very rich thing. And so to let it go just would have been like letting part of my life go, and I couldn't do that.
No.
In the end, I couldn't do that. Yeah.
That point about being rootless is a really important one, isn't it?
It really is,
because it goes to the core of your sacred perspective.
At that time, though, I'm thinking about that time. I think my roots are in a different place now, but that's that's decades later.
Yes, yes. So you did your Bachelor of Theology at Yarra. So what sort of happened with that? As you said, it helped, it broadened you.
Yeah, well, apart from it was like learning a new language, it actually gave me a language to speak about the things that I wanted to speak about. I found it very meaningful to enter into the deeper things, and I didn't do a lot of doctrinal stuff, and I did a lot of pastoral subjects and scriptural subjects, those kinds of things, and I did look at the Trinity and mysticism and things like that during and I found those things to really speak into my life experience and touched into the deeper knowing that I had no words for.
Yes. So that's important, isn't it? It gave you the words to hook into. But that was the first step in a whole process of the education. You did a dip ed.
Yes, I did a dip ed and was able to teach biblical studies and religious education and science too, because that's another part of my history.
Yeah,
but
science and history go together with time. So
yes, I do. Yeah.
We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Dr Marlene Marburg. She's from the Campion Ignatian Spirituality Centre. And just as we went to the break, I asked you about your dip ed, but that was only one of the first steps in your process. What happened after that? So
I taught for 3 years in religious education and other things, Australian studies and whatever. And then I went back to my original qualification, which is in medical radiography. And I was looking after my father along with my sisters for a number of years while he was ill. And so at the end of that time, Dad was sick for about 10 years. And at the end of that time, after he died, I decided that I wanted to do something with the work that I had done in theology and scripture and the dip ed and pastoral work. And so I went to work in a parish in Elwood, which is attached to Sacred Heart Mission. And I did some pastoral work there, and I was a pastoral associate, or did pastoral associate kind of work, visitation. And from there, I did 4 years there, and then I went to Campion Ignatian Spirituality Centre, where I did a retreat and just kind of wanted to do more study. In that time, I had done a Master of Theology as well at Australian Catholic University, and then and then I went to do the spiritual exercises of St Ignatius, which was profoundly life-changing. And that was in 2004.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I did the exercises in daily life and prayed more than I'd ever prayed probably in my life, and really found that the graces of the exercises were just wonderful and expansive, freeing.
Yes, you call them as life-changing. Is that what that was about?
I didn't know it was about that. My desire was to increase or grow my relationship with God.
Yeah.
That was what I wanted. And I felt that the accompaniment of the spiritual director every week and praying the prayer every day, according to the way that Ignatius had developed the exercises, was just really profoundly beautiful experience. And yeah.
So did it open up the scriptures, or did it open up your spirit, or how did it?
It opened the scriptures in a very real way. I wasn't studying them, I was encountering them.
Yes.
And so, and I was encountering the characters in the scripture and encountering God. And then, of course, because I was praying this retreat in daily life, every part of the prayer was coming into my daily life as well. And so I was encountering God in my world, in my everyday life.
Right.
And so there was an integration that was beginning to happen between my life and my work and my prayer and everything that I was doing. And that, I think, is what's life-changing. So no longer was I compartmentalising my spirituality or my religion. It was now becoming an everyday event.
Yeah.
Events.
Yes. So that was where one of the things that hooked you in the first place was the personalisation of Jesus in the first place. So that's grown and matured to that point.
Yes. Yes.
Not wanting to be too obscure, but where do you actually, when you're having these revelations, this opening, where do you actually feel that? Is that something which is outside, inside?
Oh no, it's very hard to know, to say. Okay, so I feel something inside. It's like an aha moment.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I understand.
So that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And gratitude and thankfulness and often wordlessness.
Yeah. Part of the key, of course, is wordlessness. We use too many words to describe something which is indescribable.
Yeah.
So, okay, well now it's looking good, and you're really starting to roll into what was to become a important part of your career. Then a PhD came up on the horizon. How did that happen?
Well, it grew out of the exercises, and from the exercises I became a spiritual director. So I did a few years training in that with Sentier Graduate College of Spiritual Formation, although it wasn't called that then, but we don't need to go there. So I did that training, and then I did a bit of supervision training as well, and then I decided to do some further study, and so I did that part-time while I was working as the Director of Student Formation at Sentier Graduate College of Spiritual Formation, which is part of the University of Divinity in Melbourne.
So you're really starting to immerse yourself in people who aspire to pretty much what you were aspiring to when you were younger. Because do you find common ground when you're talking to someone? You think, I understand where they're at.
Yes, These days, I'd be very interested in somebody doing a study on who the people are who come to religious centres and retreat centres. I think we're getting a different demographic than we might have got previously. So the people who come to Campion, I don't know if they're the people who would come to a more secular organisation, but for spiritual direction we're talking about. So I'd like to investigate that further, actually.
Yes.
So we're, thinking of moving out, or we are moving out from Campion and trying to develop a spiritual direction opportunity for people who've been disenfranchised from the church. So I think this is what you're asking me.
Yes.
Is about people who've been, who've explored their faith and found it to no longer be, or the structures of the church to no longer support the kind of faith that they've grown into.
Talking about being disenfranchised, I'll be disenfranchised if we don't take a break.
Okay, thank you.
We'll be back in a moment.
Mani Allah. Hallelujah. Mani Allah.
Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Dr Marlene Marburg. She's from the Campion Ignatian Spirituality Centre. Marlene, we were talking about the educational program and process that you went through, and we've got up to the PhD, the thesis for which you mentioned before is titled pretty much Poetry and Grace. Mm-hmm. Why that, and what's the story? Beautiful name.
Yes, a name that emerged through many names, this thesis was. But it's about the way in which poetry, the writing of poetry, the reading of poetry too, but particularly the writing of poetry, accessed deeper levels of my knowing, which is the place in which I find God. Mm-hmm. And so I experienced writing poetry as grace, as prayer, and that was something that had really emerged during the spiritual exercises, because I'd been a poet all my life, but during the exercises I started writing, and I started noticing that the writing was becoming very easy, and that I felt like there was no energy. I didn't have to expend much energy in writing. And so, I decided to investigate what this was about poetry, what it was that I was experiencing, what was this awareness that I was gaining through the writing of poetry. And so in the end, I wrote the story of writing poetry.
Okay.
And so I was exploring the way in which writing did access deeper levels of awareness of myself, of others, of God, of generally the world. And I wrote a lot of poetry in the thesis. The thesis was 10,000 words of poetry and 90,000 other words. Yeah. So it's a lot of poetry. It wasn't all refined poetry.
No.
Because it wasn't actually about that. It was about the grace that was received. By grace, I'm talking about the way in which my life was more enriched, more expanded, more relational. Yes, so...
Did you have an affinity for Merton's poetry?
Well, I hadn't. I mean, I have done a little bit of reading of Merton, but I couldn't honestly say that I have a great affinity for any particular poet.
Okay.
But I do enjoy reading poetry. I particularly like eco-poetry.
Yes.
I like Mary Oliver's work, and others. But It was the PhD itself was really about my writing the poetry.
Yes.
There were other poets in the work, but not a lot.
No.
Yeah.
Well, you had a history of it, didn't you? Because you wrote poetry from your childhood.
Yes.
And right through your evolution.
Yes.
To that point.
Yeah.
What do you think were the key elements which changed in your poetry? Was it's you read an old poem, what do you feel about that?
Well, gee, it depends how old it is.
Yeah, that's
if
right,
it's a 9-year-old poem, Look, I kind of look at it and I think, well, you know, there are some elements that are there now that were there then, but it's very different work. No, there's a freedom there. I think I can remember one day that I specifically decided that I was going to think about poetry more seriously as an adult. And the thing that came alongside that was that I knew I had to become attentive.
Right.
So it was attentiveness in so many different ways.
Okay.
And I remember being in the Westerfolds Park when I actually had that realisation. You will have to learn to listen. You will have to learn to notice those kinds of things. If you want to do poetry seriously, you will have to do these things.
Yes.
And so I did that very intentionally. And then I realised that attentiveness was also very much paralleled with the other work that I was doing in spiritual direction.
Yes,
Yeah.
that listening, and watching and being.
Yeah.
Yes.
Paying attention to the senses, using my imagination, allowing it to lead me rather than leading it, those kinds of things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's you don't have any problem with the fact that your work now is a revelation of your own sacred awareness, which is, and the Ignatian spirituality would have been one of the things which allowed you to focus. Is that right?
Ignatian spirituality, it offers a framework for all these beautiful things to come to life, and it's a wonderful framework. So imaginative contemplation, a form of prayer, is very much akin to the writing of poetry, or allowing you to use your senses and your imagination, and encounter God, and encounter God through the Word.
There's been an interesting evolution for you, because when you were talking about your early experience of your Catholic faith, that part of the reason why you wanted to look elsewhere was because you felt yourself contained in some sort of a structure. You moved out of that. Then you lost some important parts of the structure which you wanted to take back, but not the prison itself, just
That's it.
symbols of the prison.
Yeah.
And then with your poetry and the Ignatian process, it's opened you up, and that's into the whole spiritual direction context.
Yeah.
It's an almost perfect evolution of the spirit.
It is. Yeah.
It's
very much parallel. You know, poetry opens one up. A freeing spirituality like Ignatian spirituality can open you up. And I think it's consistent with my personality too. I just need to be authentic. I need to ask questions. I don't like to be locked in.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. And that's a tendency which you do suffer. Now, we've got other things that we need to talk about, and if you're able to next week, that'd be wonderful. And perhaps then we can explore the Ignatian Spirituality Centre and what happens there, how it works. And I think there's the Cardia Centre, or Cardia, you're working on something new.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
We'll have a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Harmony and Diversity, and we'll be back next week, and we will speak with Dr Marlene Marburg. Thanks for watching.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu